that recording.
Great. Thank you, LA. All right. Well, welcome everyone. I am Dr. Geneva Gibson, and I am excited to be here with our panelists, Curtis Callender and Megan Ruffing. And we're going to be talking about legal advocacy in counselor education and how we can strengthen the professional identity. And so we've got our two experts in this area. And so before I get started asking any questions, would you two mind introducing yourself, sharing a little bit about who you are, the work you're doing before we jump in.
Yeah, I'd love to. Thank you for that introduction. My name is Megan Ruffing, and I'm in my third year of the program at UC. And I'm currently a director at a counseling and wellness center at a community college. And I really didn't know how much I loved advocacy work until I started this program and kind of fell into it, which I'll share a little bit later during the panel questions. So I do find myself in new spaces now because of this program and learning more about my professional identity.
Okay, can you hear me?
Mhm.
Okay. Hi, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Curtis Callender, and I am a doctoral candidate here at UC in the program. I am a licensed counselor both in Florida and in my hometown where I'm at right now in St. Thomas, US Virgin Islands. And I actually recently just entered the private practice world. So I am getting my feet wet and acclimated as far as that goes. And as far as my work in the realm of advocacy, I actually came about that through my work locally here in the Virgin Islands on the board of licensed counselors and examiners. And so I've been on the board for a few years now, and that has kind of been my path into advocacy, if you will.
Awesome. Thank you both. I am super excited about this topic because I do think that sometimes it can seem a little overwhelming, just how one can get involved. And so let's start off with could each of you share a little bit about, or maybe an example of how you've engaged in legal advocacy and how that has impacted the counseling profession or counselor identity?
Yeah. So I was in a class with Dr. Todd at the time. So this would have been back in 2022. And we happened to be talking about practicing across state lines and the counseling compact and whether or not the states that we were living in allowed it. And I live in Arkansas. And I had heard a little bit about the counseling compact, but not enough to speak about it in class. And so she had advised all of us, hey, you should really find out in your state what if you're a part of it. And if you're not, contact your local legislators. So I did that. That night, I sent an email, didn't even know who our legislators were, found out we had two. I emailed both of them. 2 days later, I got a response from Representative Hawk, and had no idea, a huge mental health advocate, and was like, I absolutely want to help you move this forward. And so a year later, the Counseling Compact, Arkansas joined the Counseling Compact as the 19th state. And so that was so cool to see that it was a year-long process, but I got to work really closely with her and her team on what it looks like to write a bill, make amendments, go to the House, go to the Senate, and things I had never experienced before, all from just a simple email of advocating. And the way that it helps our profession is it helps with continuity of care. So how many times do we have clients that move out of state and are like, hey, can I just see you until I find a new therapist? Or, oh my gosh, I don't want to start over again. Like, what am I going to do? And so those were all things we talked about when we were working on this bill, is why is this important to have? And what does this look like for clinicians and for clients?
So my experience has come about with my role on the Virgin Islands Licensed Board of Counselors and Examiners. And I was added to this board in 2019. And that actually is basically when the board became functional. So counseling is a new profession in the Virgin Islands. Prior to the establishment of this board, which grants an LPC, a licensed substance abuse counseling license, and then also a licensed marriage and family therapist license, there was really only psychologists and social workers as far as licensed behavioral health practitioners. And so it was a big deal that, things actually started moving. The bill had been in the works for years, but there was no movement. And so when I accepted the position, I kind of thought that it was going to be really just, reviewing applications, making sure that applicants met the requirements for licensure that had been established. And I quickly found out that it was going to be way more than that. It kind of, as we started doing business and having the meetings and reviewing applications and so forth, we kind of realized that there were certain things missing in the statutes and the code as it pertains to counseling. One of the big things is that it talks about requiring supervision, of course, and the amount of hours and having an approved supervisor and all of this. But there's really, even though it talks about that, there's no path for people who have just graduated from a master's program. There is no associate level license, or in Florida, they call it like a registered intern. There's nothing like that. So it's like, well, okay, you have these people who need to be licensed and they've completed certain things, but then how do they get the the clinical supervision hours? And so that's one of many issues because the bill was not written by people in the counseling field. And so as a result, we found ourselves, providing education to both the community about who counselors are and what they do. Just because we were new, we found ourselves having to communicate with our local Senate and go before them and provide testimony. I'm trying to get amendments done to our local code. And so that really is kind of what has been transpiring here in the Virgin Islands, in addition to the usual day-by-day business of reviewing applications. And so because we're a new profession, it's been a lot of that education, a lot of making sure that the older, more established professions that feel a little bit threatened by our coming onto the scene are not basically defining for us who we are as counselors and what our scope is, and making sure that the lawmakers understand, based on the major bodies in mental health, what it is that counselors actually do.
Wow, thank you both for that. And I think that just highlights the importance of our voice within these spaces. And so I'm wondering, kind of to that point, if you guys could say a little bit more just about how legal advocacy shapes professional identity for counselors and promotes leadership within our field.
So I wrote a couple of things down. It definitely reinforces ethical responsibility and professional standards. I think as clinicians, we have this responsibility to know what's going on in our profession. And the Counseling Compact was something that I had heard about, but I really wasn't intentional about learning about it until somebody had said to me, hey, you should probably know what's going on in your state, just even at a surface level, just explore it. And so I think with that came some empowerment for me as a clinician of, oh, I do have this power to look into things and at least advocate for what I believe in. It doesn't necessarily mean it's always going to end up in a bill passing, but there was something about the process that felt really good and really aligned with my values as a human and as a clinician. And I formed a really great relationship out of it with the representative, and we were able to work on future things together, which I don't think would have happened if we had not had this opportunity. It also, I think, empowered people around me. My staff got to see what I was doing because it took a whole year. But they were like, wait, how is this happening? And I was learning as I went too. So I think that added to the empowerment piece of feeling like, oh, I have a say in this. I can be a part of this. So I think just me personally feeling good about it, also the staff seeing it, other clinicians see it, the interns that I supervise here, being able to see what advocacy in action looks like rather than just when we're in school in a master's program, we're reading about it, reading about it, reading about it, but this is what it looks like when you put it into action. And that was really helpful for them to see.
Yeah, in addition to the points that you just made, I think being involved in advocacy really forces you um, to take a step back and really like examine what it means to be a counselor and counselor identity, because how can you really advocate for something if you don't understand who we are and what it is that we do, and a little bit about the history of how counseling came about, especially the nuanced differences between the various mental health professions and kind of like some of the underlying philosophy behind them. So I think it really does play a role when it comes to that, and I think it also fosters the leadership, because in order to be, at least I think anyway, in order to be successful as an advocate, you really have to connect with other people and that are involved. You have to, I think there's a role as well for training other people to become advocates once you kind of feel a bit comfortable in that role. And so I think that's definitely steps into the realm of leadership as well in the field of counseling.
Awesome. Thank you guys for sharing. And it's very clear you guys did not do this alone. And so could you share a little bit about the role that collaboration and coalition building play in successful advocacy efforts, and then maybe just some information on what effective partnerships within the profession or within organizations looks like, and how counselors can do that effectively.
Yeah, as I was preparing for today's panel, I went through all of my emails over the year just to kind of revisit the process. Because once the bill passed, it was kind of like, okay, that's done. Like that was exciting. What's the next thing I can advocate for? So it was really cool for me to be able to go back through and read like, wow, I said that, or wow, that collaboration happened. I would say it amplified the voices of therapists in the community. This was something that was not on the representatives' radar. I mean, they've got so many different bills that are going on that they can't possibly be thinking about every single thing. So I really think it's part of our duty to bring those things forward and bring it to their attention and educate them on why is this important. She heard the piece mental health and she was on board, but she was like, why is this important? Why is continuity of care important? What does this look like for you guys? So it started really just between her and I. And then we had to do some research about, are there statutes with this bill? And so that's when their lawyer, the legal side of things, came in. And so then it became me, the representative, and her legal team. Well, then we realized this is actually a health bill. And so we need to bring in the health side of things, the health sector, which didn't have anything to do with the legal team at that time. And so then we had to include the health sector piece of this. And so through that, I got to meet a congressman who was included on the emails. And then I got the representative's cell phone number and talk about this. So it just kept building and building and building. And out of that came other conversations of, well, what about this? And have you thought about this? And that's how the second advocacy piece came out about a suicide hotline. But it was because there were so many people involved in the process and everybody had their own areas of expertise and were willing to collaborate for like the better of everybody, that it ended up working out. So my advice would be, yes, it can feel overwhelming and a little scary, and maybe there's some imposter syndrome there, but it starts with just one conversation and one ask and one person, and then it kind of snowballs in a good way of getting all these people on board with this one mission.
Yeah, definitely. I think collaboration is essential. You know, it's about providing a unifying voice. It's about strengthening your impact. In a situation like we are in here in the Virgin Islands, being the new kids on the block, it's about assisting and providing credibility to your arguments. That it's not just Curtis Calendar, counselor in the Virgin Islands, but it's no, this is, we have all these major bodies agreeing with us. I think it's also about not reinventing the wheel, right? Because when you look at the major advocacy issues for counseling around the country, like they happen over and over and over across states. So there are states that have been successful in advocating for certain issues, and so looking at how they went about it, and using that information to help your cause, I think is very important rather than kind of fumbling through it, on your own. Look at established models and things that have worked. Specifically here in the Virgin Islands, with our amendment, a proposal for amendments to the code, one of the big things, in addition to the associate category, was there was a big deal about whether or not counselors should be providing testing. And the psychologists had a big problem with testing being part of our scope. And so a lot of what we did was that we brought in other people to assist. We had a representative from NBCC. We had a representative from the National Board for Forensic Counselors, and people that have been involved in this fight, for counselors to provide education. To provide testing and provide education on that issue. And so it's still an ongoing issue. For some other political reasons here. But that is one of the things that I think is very helpful, to have people that have been in the fight and know the history of the particular issues to be in your corner and provide support, especially when they're coming from national bodies in the counseling field, to provide that leverage and credibility.
So what you guys just shared, I mean, it's amazing work that you're doing. And Megan, you mentioned that imposter syndrome. And Curtis, I saw you shaking your head when you said that. And so I would imagine from my own experience, but in working with other students and professionals in the field, that can be a big thing. And so I'm sure many are like wondering, counselor educators and students, they want to get involved. They want to get started somewhere in doing this work. Would you guys have any recommendations for strategies or best practices for getting involved and for doing this work?
Yeah, so when my imposter syndrome got the best of me, I thought, okay, let's go back to basics, right? Like they say in counseling, like if you've got all these interventions coming in, just go back to basics. So I was like, what is my basic? Well, my bachelor's degree is in journalism. And so I didn't start out in the therapy world. And I thought, I know how to write really well. And I know how to connect with people, and I know how to interview, and I know how to have those one-on-one conversations. And I was like, that's what I can use as my leverage in this space. Even though I don't know how to advocate necessarily, I think I do, but maybe not at the level I was thinking I might need to advocate at to get something passed. And so I thought, where are my areas of strength? What am I confident in? What do I know about myself? And why am I doing this? And I think I'd had enough clients and working in the clinic to see what happens when you don't have that continuity of care. And so that was my why of why I was doing this and why I wanted to see this go forward. So I think remembering that and then falling back on what do I know that I do really well? And that's writing emails, connecting with people. And so I just made sure that every time I sent an email, like I was using those skills to make sure that I was connecting and following up. And I think that is almost a lost art at times because of where we're at and in the world right now. But sometimes just connecting with somebody on like that personal level is so important.
Yeah, to piggyback off of what you just said, Megan, I think it's important to first start with, kind of looking at the landscape of the field and maybe just even in your local area, what's happening. And then what are the needs? And from there, what are the things that you are passionate about? And kind of start there. And also realizing that, yes, we're talking about specifically like legal and legislative advocacy, but that there are tons of different types of advocacy and at different levels. You don't necessarily have to start at that level where you're going to Capitol Hill or you're giving testimony. There are other smaller things that you can do that also have an impact and play a role. But I think as far as getting involved, um, start with the counseling organizations. Start with ACA, NBCC, ACEs. They all have arms that focus on advocacy. There's a ACEs interest group network that you can join. I think ACA also has like a monthly power hour advocacy meeting where you can join and hear about different things going on in different states, and then it can connect you to different resources. So that is the way to go, is to start with the counseling organizations to kind of get your foot in the door, get connected to people that are considered experts or just like really heavily involved, and then that's the way to kind of figure out what direction you want to go, and get not only opportunities but guidance.
Awesome, awesome. It sounds like connection is an important part of advocacy. Connecting with individuals, connecting with others who can amplify your voice, and that is something we as counselors do well, or at least we should do well, right? Is connecting with people, listening, hearing the needs, and being able to communicate those things. So thank you guys for sharing that. So the next question is, what are the most pressing legal or legislative challenges currently facing the counseling profession? And how can counselor educators and students contribute to addressing these challenges?
So I was thinking about kind of like what Curtis was saying, like looking at your landscape and what's happening in your area, in your communities. For me, I work at a community college, and so most of our population does not have insurance. And so a huge need that I see is people needing mental health services, but they can't afford them. And here at the college, it's part of their student fee. So while they do get therapy while they're in classes, when we go to refer them out in the community, they can't afford it. And so we're having to look for other options. And so I see that as one of the biggest barriers right now for mental health here where I'm at in Arkansas. And we also, I'm considered to be in the Bible Belt. And so there are a lot of people with religious trauma here that, regardless of what side you're on, that need the help that they're looking for. And that's not always accessible to them in this area. And so just making sure that you are, when you're making referrals, that you're making referrals that make sense for the client, so that they have more access to care. When I'm working with clients who I do end up referring out that maybe are lower socioeconomic, maybe they're living in multi-generational homes, maybe they're sending money home to, families in different areas. I'm looking for places that are maybe taking pro bono, or maybe they have interns and they're doing a sliding scale, or they're doing free, or they're doing like $5 sessions for accountability purposes. And so part of when I refer someone is not just to say, hey, here are your options, but it's to say, hey, this is important to me. I want to make sure that you are getting the care that you need when you leave here. Let's look at the options together. How can I help you in this? So I see this as a need. I see this as something that needs to be better. And I'm trying to do as much as I can to advocate for these clients in the capacity that I can.
So I think this is a, a difficult question, to answer. As I was thinking about it, I kind of have two different trains of thought. The first, I think that generally, especially because of my experiences here, I would say that probably the one of the biggest issues is marketplace recognition. And so when I say that, I mean making sure that that people know who counselors are and what they do, making sure that counselors are treated in an equitable fashion when it comes to their compensation for the work that they do in comparison to other mental health professions, um, making sure that we're able to practice our through our full scope, based on our training. There's still some states where people that are counselors cannot actually diagnose mental health conditions, because despite the fact that it is something that we're trained to do in their particular state, they're not allowed to. Or maybe they're allowed to, but under the supervision of a psychiatrist or something along those lines. Um, so I think focusing on that marketplace recognition and equity is a major issue in the counseling field, and making sure that people understand who it is that we are and what we can actually do. Um, Honestly, if I'm being frank, I think one of the things that we need to kind of focus on is kind of providing some uniformity and streamlining in our credentials, because honestly, I think it's confusing for clients, depending on what your state you're in, it's a different alphabet soup. I'm an LPC and LSAC here in the Virgin Islands. In Florida, I'm an LMHC. If I had gotten licensed in Maryland, where I did my master's, I would have been an LCPC. And I just think that it's too much. It's too much. Like, for us, we understand what it means and we get it. But for somebody that is not well versed in the field, it's a lot to kind of muddle through when you just want help. That's the bottom line. You want some assistance. And I think when you look at the other fields, it's not like that. For the most part, it's a licensed psychologist in whatever state. And for the most part, it's an LMFT in whatever state. It's an LCSW in whatever state, with a few exceptions. I've seen, I'm licensed independent clinical social worker. But for the most part, there's much more uniformity. And I think that the counseling profession really needs to get the state boards involved and work on that, because it's muddy. So that's one issue. Then I would say that because of where we are right now and the current climate of the country and everything that's been happening with the current administration, a major issue that has kind of popped up is just making sure that constitutional protections remain in place as far as our work with clients and how we are able to protect clients and the information about them, and so making sure that we're fighting back against when our clients are being targeted, when we're being targeted, especially for the hot topic issues, whether it be immigration, whether it be trans affirming care, things like that. Those are things that really are on the forefront of my mind right now. And so I think it's something that we need to really focus on as a whole.
Thank you for sharing that. And I appreciate that thought about uniformity within the profession. That can be a seriously confusing thing for clients. And so you just brought up a lot of great issues. And so I think sometimes too, the other issue may be like, there's so many things. What do I focus on? What do I put my voice toward? Because if you focus on too many things, you can get lost kind of in all the things that are needed and all the work that needs to be done, and it can become overwhelming. So I appreciate you guys just sharing those thoughts. And so moving into our next question, how can counselor education programs integrate advocacy training into the curriculum to better prepare students to engage in legal and policy related advocacy work?
I think having a professor bring it up in the first place was how, I guess I never thought it was possible. It wasn't even on my radar. Especially where we're at in the program. Like, we're all very busy, but we all have things that we're really passionate about. And so I think there was almost this permission there to say, like, hey, it's okay to ask a question. It's okay to explore what's going on in your community. It doesn't mean you have to devote a ton of time to it. You can just start with one question. So I think having faculty that ask those questions is really helpful. I think of today's panel. I would have never considered myself an expert in this area. And Dr. LA asking me to be a part of this, and then me going through and preparing for this and looking at all the work I did over the past year, I'm like, oh my gosh, I didn't realize I did all this. And so I think having professors that notice something that you're doing and calling it out and saying, no, you did that, like, you should talk about it, because there may be other people who have an idea, who have a passion, and just need to see that if this is possible and that it is important what you have to say, because we are the ones in the room sitting with these people every single day. And so we're getting the privilege of hearing these stories and really being able to advocate with the positions that we're in. And I don't take that for granted. So I think having professors who see that in us is helpful. I also think maybe like creating a separate course of some sort, like for people who are really wanting to go into this field. Maybe it's something where you're taking it to another level. I don't know what that would look like. But that might be an option as well. So I guess my advice would be having professors add it to their course, bringing those questions up, noticing things in your students, and then maybe adding a separate course.
Yeah, those are excellent suggestions, Megan. I think to add to that, I would say that the programs at least our program anyway, I can speak to that. I think they do a good job of touching on kind of the theoretical, right? You have a leadership and advocacy course, you're talking about leadership competencies, advocacy competencies, multicultural and social justice competencies. But and then of course there's the practicum, right, where you have to actually do advocacy work as well, or internship rather. But I think there needs to be more focus on the actual what it looks like, on the implementation of it and not just the theory behind it. So maybe somehow finding a way to build in mentorship in the programs around advocacy work, and obviously I know it's hard to ask the professors to do one more thing than they're already doing, right? But you know, having it, some sort of mentorship program, having it built in, not just in the one course, but throughout the entire program where you're talking about advocacy. You're looking at specifically, okay, yes, you can write letters, you can do this, you can do that, but what does it look like? What is a good like how do you write that letter? And because I think part of it is that people may know that it needs to be done, but people are intimidated. People are afraid because, it's just like, wait, you want me to do what? You want me to go testify, you know, um, in the legislature? Like I went to school to be a counselor. Like I get it, but I don't know about that. So I think that's part of it. Um, I think making sure that the students really, really, really understand why it's important, because we, in our day to day, it's like, oh, we're going to see our clients, we got to do our notes, we got to do this, but really taking a step back and making sure they get it that, well, listen, it doesn't matter if you're not advocating for the field because you won't be able to provide the care if laws are passed and changed that affect what you can do. And that has been my biggest experience in this whole thing. It's like, I'm not even somebody that is like big into testing, but it lit a fire in me because it's like, it's about providing access for clients and access to care. And it may not be necessarily my specialty, but if there are counselors who have had extensive amount of training in this and even beyond their programs gone on and done additional certifications, why would they not be allowed to do this, especially when the bodies that create the testing have different qualification standards and tell you that if you have X amount of education, then you can do these particular tests and you have to provide the proof to even purchase the test. So why are we legislating this when there are already built-in controls? And so the goal is to make sure that you have that right. And so that is the point of the advocacy. And so drilling that into the students, I think, is exceptionally important. And then the one more thing I would say is that we have people who come into CES, the CES programs, or even if they're not on a doc level, just getting licensed as counselors that come from a multitude of different fields. I myself, my master's was technically in counseling psychology. I did not come through a clinical mental health counseling program. And so as a result, I think that one of the first things that the program needs to do, or that the programs need to do, is to really start with the counselor identity. What does it mean, and drill it in so that there is an understanding, there is a connection to it, which will then therefore feed the want to protect the profession versus just being, somebody licensed as a counselor, for whatever reason, whether maybe you did a doc program in psychology, but it wasn't APA or accredited, so you couldn't get licensed as a psychologist in your state. And so then your route was to become a licensed professional counselor. Making sure that people both at on the just being licensed, and then the schools actually have a connection to the field and aren't just using it as a path to practice.
Thank you guys for sharing those thoughts. I'm hearing so many great ideas that I want to take and integrate into the work that I'm doing as a counselor educator. At this point, we are a little bit ahead of schedule. And so I am going to open it up. I see Dr. Kyron in the chat sharing some thoughts and things like that. And so I want to open up the discussion, but I did have one question that I wanted to ask as we transition into kind of having some more discussion about this. But this is not easy work. It can be very taxing. It can be draining. You might be putting all this work in just to wait, like maybe there's a year and incurs all of the layers and steps and stages and barriers you might run into. How do you guys protect your own well-being? How do you take care of yourself when you're doing this type of work?
I always believe in consultation and like mentorship. So for me, that's an accountability piece. So when I started this advocacy work, I was still in my LAC licensure. So I was still under supervision. And so I really leaned on my supervisor to help me stay accountable in that way. There were times where she could see that I was getting so passionate about this. And she was like, Megan, this might not happen, but I don't want you to look back on this and be like, oh my gosh, my time was wasted because this didn't happen. Or maybe I didn't get an email back from somebody, or maybe like I messed up an email and I was like really hard on myself and thinking maybe I'll be the reason this doesn't get passed. And so I think just finding somebody to be transparent with and vulnerable with and share why I was doing this and why it was so important to me. And also having that permission from someone to be like, hey, you just exploring this and you just making yourself more aware of what's going on in your community is a big deal. And that's important. That's part of your role as a therapist. So I think it's made me more aware of myself and like my role and what I do every day. And so that like lit a fire in me. I think Curtis, you said lit a fire in you too. And it lit a fire in me to just keep exploring different things and remember that it may take time and that's okay.
Yeah, I think you hit the nail on the head there, Megan. I think for me personally, one of the things that I have done is that, on the particular, hot button issues that we have been working on here is kind of going and looking at the history in other states as far as, states that have been fighting the same topics. And, that really has helped me to kind of get it and understand that, this is something that sometimes takes a lot of time and it's the process. And, you keep at it, it doesn't mean that it's not worth fighting for. It is, and just understanding that it may not happen right now. It may happen later when I'm no longer on the local board, but stones, bricks are being laid right now. To help make it a possibility in the future. And so that just kind of helps to keep me grounded a bit, and like you said, just talking with other people, about their experiences as well, and, sometimes it is necessary to kind of take a step back for a little bit, you just, maybe I need a few days, where I put it down. I don't think about it for a little bit, kind of re-energize, recharge, and then, go back at it again, so that's really kind of my approach to that, to kind of make sure that I don't become overwhelmed with it to the point where I just say that's it. I'm over it, and I don't want to focus on this anymore. And then just kind of keeping that client focus in the back of your mind that this is, yes, it's about the profession, but ultimately ensuring that ensuring we can do what we do as professionals ultimately circles right back around and impacts the clients, which is why we, for the most part, all entered into this field anyway.
Thank you both for sharing. Does anyone have a question that they'd like to ask or comment they have about anything that has been shared?
I was typing in the chat. Dr. Shay Carper responded to my comment. And what I was in the middle of typing is that I think it's important for us to, as professors and educators, to also have a baseline or have an understanding of our students' baseline. Because I just keep thinking of this idea of, I guess, like a literacy around policy, law, etc. Like even outside of our field, and even just using myself as an example, like up until a certain point, I didn't know how things went. I didn't know what different terms were. I didn't know the due process for things. And again, that can feel overwhelming and layering on top what we've got going on in our world right now. And so when I mentioned kind of reframing how we talk about it, I think, and I'm kind of thinking about back to my experience as a student, I think sometimes the sentiment is, yes, we're charged with advocacy, right, in our profession. But I think sometimes it feels like a duty, in a negative sense, right? Whereas maybe we can also reframe it as like another option. I'm thinking about burnout, and a lot of professors and a lot of clinicians are talking about feeling burnt out with clinical work. And it's like, okay, well, you can shift. Like you can still be client facing in a totally different way. And so maybe even framing our conversations in that way around what that part of our work can look like.
I love that you just shared that, Dr. Kai, because after this all happened and I had this experience, I went back to my calendar and was like, where do I want to be intentional about my time? And I ended up joining a local crisis board here where we're doing suicide prevention work because I thought, I don't want to, yes, we can feel burnt out when we're seeing clients and I still love this profession. So where can I pivot and put some of my energy where I'm still feeling like I'm helping people, but it might be in a different way right now. So I'm really like taking time for myself if I am feeling burnt out from clients. So I love that you just said that about reframing that and pivoting and looking at like the different areas of counseling where we can be client facing.
Yeah. I guess think about myself again, if I maybe didn't continue on with my education or didn't join workshops and didn't join different conversations, I may not have had so many ideas of the different things that I can do as a clinician with my license and all of those things. So just continuation of, as counselors, maybe working with mentees or as supervisors, as professors, like really giving these tangible examples of what else we can do.
I just thought of an example of something, Dr. Kai, when you were talking about like this baseline knowledge. I remember when Dr. Todd was talking about this and like contacting our legislators, and I was like, wait, don't I need to ask somebody like if I can contact them? Or like, wait, like, is my email going to go through? So, like, for me, I don't want to say there was no baseline, but if there was no baseline, I was probably like right above it because I had no clue. And so she was like, yeah, just look them up online. Just email them. There's probably an email. And I'm like, okay. So I felt like I was sending it off into like this black hole of this abyss that was never going to come back at me. And then 2 days later, I got an email. I'm like, oh, it worked. So I think just like having someone be like, yeah, just look it up, like see what you can find. That was helpful.
Yeah.
Well, I think one of the things that stood out to me when you were talking, Megan, and I know this from you as well, Curtis, is that both of you tapped into your pre-existing skill set to do this work, right? Like you both said, okay, how can I use what I already know to move into this space that I don't know? And what would that look like? And I think that's important to know is that all of us are bringing some skill set that would be valuable for some level of advocacy, right? And to really invest in that. Mm-hmm.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'll just add to, sorry I'm off camera, but yeah, Dr. Kai, I appreciate you being open to my comment there. Just in my role as counselor educator, specifically teaching the multicultural course during this past election and our current administration, I have really found myself in a space of encouraging students not to bury their head in the sand, because a lot of my students were affected by, negatively affected by the last election and having some really strong responses to that. And I encouraged them, I said, this can be a platform for you to make changes. And this can be a way for you to engage more in the field, and step up in that advocacy role. So take this as an opportunity is what I learned from the panel as well. Like, that opportunity presents itself and you're passionate about something, use that as a way to move forward and really just, letting them know and encouraging them and giving them that knowledge that this field is political. There are some things that we have to, abide by and follow, and society wise, it's something that we have to do. And, to not be afraid and bury your head in the sand, but instead, like you said earlier, reframe it. What can I do in this space? And so I found myself really weaving it into my classes in every lesson and bringing it up in discussion to continue to encourage students to challenge themselves and their peers.
Thank you for sharing that, Dr. Carper. Susan, I see your hand.
Hi. I wanted to add just a couple of brief things. I really like the idea of us better understanding the different licensure types. I really try to work on that with my students. As someone who is both an LPC and an LCSW, I had a student in a counseling master's program tell me, well, I think I'll just become a social worker like you. And I was like, oh, that's a whole different master's. It doesn't, you can't just graduate with a master's and then pick the different licensures. And so it really was opened my mind and to not everybody's understanding this. And so that kind of becomes part of what I do, especially my clinical classes, to help them understand who does what, and that we wouldn't refer to a psychiatrist if somebody was wanting therapy, and helping them understand that. And I think too, for us as a social worker, I really like that counseling is really moving more into like the referral and advocacy part, or maybe being more open about it. And I want everyone, and I work with my students and my clients, to understand that both our state elected officials and our federal officials, they have a case management system. So when we call them with issues, it is logged in, basically an electronic health record, to track what they've done to help. And so I have referred so many people to call for passport issues, for immigration issues, for veterans issues, that there are employees within these systems set up to help and advocate for them. But people don't realize that that's what our tax dollars are are going for. And I will say the last thing, as a licensed counselor and a licensed social worker in Texas, and I've been calling my representatives, I finally had to take the big step and tell them, I'm a counselor, I'm a social worker, this is why I'm calling. And one of the reasons I hadn't is I had been concerned about being on a list or being targeted when I'm advocating for what all the different things I'm calling about, whether it's mistreatment of people, or the disappearing of people, or folks on Medicaid, every different issue that I'm calling about. But when I say that, they treat it different. They treat my call differently when I use my licensure and my experience and my education. And so I think that we all have to remember that when we're calling it, it has more weight than we think. I mean, they're busy thanking me at the same time they're voting against what I'm asking for. So it's kind of a juxtaposition that you get put in. But I think we have to step up and help in the ways, but also help our clients and students understand that they can reach out to get help with some of their issues.
Any other thoughts or questions before we move towards closing our time together? Well, if there aren't any more questions, then just as a kind of a final wrap up, I want to ask, are there any other or additional recommendations that Megan, Curtis, you would give, or even others in the room, that you could share for those who are wanting to expand their advocacy role? So any final recommendations, final thoughts on that for those who are wanting to expand their role of what they're currently doing?
I can give maybe like a real life example of something that I'm currently going through. But this will be part of my dissertation, but I have a passion for getting therapists in schools. In Arkansas, where I live, we don't have therapists in schools. And so I'm trying to find different ways to advocate for that in the way that I can. And one of those ways I have found recently is providing training to all of the school counselors in the district about mental health. Not that they don't have a background in mental health, but they're asking for more resources. And so, how can we help the people that are in the schools with the students right now that have a lot of the skills needed, but maybe need a little bit more information about what's currently happening with mental health? And so I went back to my basics and reached out to the executive director of student support services here in our town because I knew the superintendent of the district. And so I was able to get a coffee meeting with her. And out of that has come a district training for 4 different districts for their school counselors, their vice principals, and their principals. So I'm currently in that right now. And it has not been without some imposter syndrome again, but I'm working through it. So I guess I would just share, like, again, remember your why and like your passion, and also like it's okay to take your time. You know, things might not be going on my timeline right now, but I'm super thankful that I had the counseling compact experience. So I'm using that to fuel me going forward in what I'm doing right now.
I would just say, firstly, I want to underscore just getting involved again with the national organizations and their arms that focus on advocacy. I really do think that's a great way to kind of get your feet wet, with some help and guidance and so forth. Um, and I think the other thing that I would say is that if you function in the role of a counselor supervisor, you have supervisees that you're, overseeing as they work towards getting their state license. Definitely make sure that you include and integrate advocacy discussions into your supervision sessions. You know, I think that we tend to focus a lot, and rightfully so, of course, on the clinical skills. Um, but I do think that there is a place, in addition to all the things that we typically talk about, on the documentation and actually interventions and ethics and all those things, adding discussions about advocacy and what that looks like into those supervision sessions. I think that if we were doing that as a whole, that it would have a remarkable impact on the profession.
That is so good. I love that. Integrating that into those times where we're working with our supervisees and helping them. That's that. I think the next layer when we think about after students graduate and they move into the profession, who is the next gatekeeper in place, right? The supervisors, and so that's a huge responsibility. And I love that thought about that taking on that role of continuing to foster the things that they're learning in school, including advocacy work. So thank you so much. I think that is going to conclude our time for today. Any closing words, LA, or we are wrapping up?
No, I just want to thank Dr. Gibson for being our panel facilitator and thank both of our panelists for their amazing wealth of information and for everybody being here. The recording will be on the UC Counseling YouTube channel by Monday at the latest. So feel free to share it and use it in classes or, have conversations with others about it. Hope to see you at a future scholarly engagement event. Have a wonderful afternoon.